Right. Let the record reflect that the members of the jury are present, the parties are present, their representatives are present. We are continuing with the opening statements. Mr. Mott, would you care to address the jury?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court.
Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to thank you again on behalf of myself and Mr. Quarles and our client, Mr. Tysjohaun Cooper, for you being here and giving your time and your energy to this cause. As the judge has previously indicated, opening statements are not evidence, so nothing that you heard from Mr. Davis is evidence. Nothing you hear from me will be evidence. The indictment is not evidence. There's no evidence so far. And you are to reserve your decision in this case after you've heard all of the evidence, after you've heard the instructions of the judge, after you've gotten the jury instructions from the judge, and after you go into the jury room and deliberate, and not until then. On behalf of Tysjohaun Cooper, our position is that the evidence will show that Lynn Blake, on June the 30th of 2004, at approximately 9:30 p.m., at 319 Center Street in Holly Hill, walked out of her door in a duplex, walked to the next door, which is not much longer than this jury box, had John Cataneo summoned to the door, and shot and killed John Cataneo. Lynn Blake, the state's key state's witness, is a murderess, and she will come in here and try to save herself with the deal that she cut with the state, not only to avoid the death penalty, not only to avoid life in prison, but to possibly walk out of here on probation. That's the deal that Lynn Blake got. Lynn Blake and Karen Tobie met in the mid-90s during Bike Week. A friend of Ron Blake, who at that time Lynn Blake was married to, had a friend up north that knew Karen Tobie, and he brought her down during Bike Week. Lynn and Karen became good friends. And Lynn became like a mother to Karen. Karen eventually moved down from up north to Ormond Beach and was a roommate with Lynn Blake and Ron Blake. As time went on, a few months, 6 months or a year, Karen Tobie got her own place. But Lynn Blake and Karen Tobie continued to be very good friends. In 2002, John Cataneo and Karen Tobie met, and they married. About the same time, Lynn Blake and Ron Blake were splitting up. They separated and ultimately divorced. And as time went on, Lynn Blake ended up moving in right next door to Karen Tobie. And Lynn Blake was as a mother to Karen. She took care of Karen. You'll hear from witnesses that Karen had a lot of problems, not just alcohol, but on prescribed drugs. And there was very few times during any given day that Karen Tobie was even lucid. You'll even hear from Sean McGuire, one of the investigators, that during his investigation, he told Lynn Blake, he says, I've never seen her sober. Is she ever sober? Is she ever in a sound state of mind? Is she ever competent? Is she ever lucid? Does she ever know what's going on? And Lynn pretty much says, she doesn't even know left from right, north from south, or east to west. She can't even get around the block. I have to drive her everywhere. Karen Tobie and John Cataneo became a mother and a father. During the pregnancy, John and Karen considered aborting. Karen had had trouble previously with pregnancies, and they considered aborting. Lynn Blake convinced them to have the baby. Lynn Blake considered baby Lewis her own child. treated him as such, considered him such, and deeply loved baby Lewis. The first time that Lynn Blake heard baby Lewis's heartbeat and saw him on the monitor, on the sonogram, she cried. She'll tell you she hadn't cried for years. She's not the type of person who cries. As a matter of fact, she's a self-described, self-admitted, out of her own words, she will tell you that she is a control freak. In her own words, not my words, she is a dominating bitch. But she cried when she heard that baby's heartbeat and when she saw the sonogram of that baby. Baby Lewis was born in October of 2002, and it was as if this child were Lynn Blake's own. Lynn Blake's world was wonderful. She had a house that was paid for by John Cataneo. She had a car that was paid for by John Cataneo. She had a daughter, Karen. She had a little baby boy, maybe a grandson, Lewis, in her own mind. She had not a worry in the world until February the 14th of 2004, when, as a result of marital discords, John Cataneo announced to Karen Tobie that he was going to have her committed, he was going to divorce her, and he was going to have her have the baby, take the baby, Lewis. Going to have her committed, divorce her, and take the baby away from her. Karen reported that to Lynn. It devastated Lynn. Her world began to crumble. Lynn Blake's world began to crumble. John eventually told Lynn that himself. That's right. I'm going to take baby Lewis. We're going to go up to Georgia, and we're going to take it. He's never coming back. You're never going to see him again. What did that mean to Lynn Blake? She'll tell you. No more house, no more car, no more daughter, no more grandbaby. Her world was coming apart. As a consequence, she decided that John Cataneo had to die. She began working for John Cataneo because his business was a mess. So she started looking into his financial affairs. How good was the business? Can the business be salvaged after John is gone? She goes to Ed Foley, who's a friend of the family and knows John as a plumbing supply person. She goes to him and says that she needs a gun, but for protection. Not to kill John Cataneo, protection, because John had recently, business was so good, he had recently gotten a contract with Home Depot. Not to do contracted work for people that come in and say, well, I want this new bathtub and I want it installed, and the people at Home Depot say, well, you call John Cataneo. It wasn't that. It was actually doing the work at Home Depots for any plumbing in the state of Florida. So he was doing well. And Lynn Blake began to get her hands into his business. Ed Foley knew about Lynn Blake winning the gun, but for protection, because John was gone. A lot of times in the middle of the night, he could be called. Home Depot number, store number so-and-so, Melbourne needs a leaky faucet, toilet broke, something needs to be fixed. He's got to go, or have somebody else go. It's got to be attended to. Lynn Blake thought about getting the gun herself. But you'll hear this, she's a convicted felon, so she couldn't get one. She has friends that are outlaws, but she thought they'd ask too many questions. About the same time, late winter or early spring of 2004, Ty Cooper goes to work for Cataneo Plumbing. Not only did he work for Cataneo Plumbing, he did odd jobs around the house. laid sod, fixed fences, did other things. Wasn't at all unusual for Ty Cooper to be around the Cataneo house, either doing odd jobs around the house or business-related matters with the plumbing company, dropping off materials, picking up materials. Sometime between March, and it's not perfectly clear from the evidence, but sometime between March and June the 30th, 2004, Lynn Blake got a gun or guns. It's not clear exactly where that gun came from the evidence, but it's clear that she got one. At about the same time, too, as a regular course of affairs, Mr. Blake, Ron Blake, would call Lynn on a regular basis. They had an amicable divorce. They got along. They do grocery shopping together. As a matter of fact, on a regular basis, they would talk about what are we going to have for dinner this week, and they go out grocery shopping, get the food. Ron Blake would buy it, and Lynn Blake would prepare it. And curiously enough, it seems that on a fairly regular basis, Ron Blake would call Lynn Blake about 9:30 p.m., almost every night. Not every single night, but almost every night. Lynn Blake confided in Ron Blake that there were problems and that she was worried about losing Lewis, that she was worried about losing her whole world because of John Cataneo's desire to divorce Karen Tobie, to take baby Lewis away, and to put an end to Lynn Blake's world. On June the 30th, 2004, at 9 o'clock, not 9:30, at 9 o'clock, Ron Blake and Lynn Blake have a conversation. About the same time, John Cataneo and his mother, Ann Cataneo, Phyllis Cataneo, returned from shopping in preparation for the very next day, July the 1st, departing for Georgia for a family reunion or a summer vacation. Within 30 minutes, John Cataneo is shot dead at his doorstep. There is a knock on the door. Phyllis Cataneo goes to the door. Who is it? On the 911 tape, which you will hear, she hears a person, Ron, Caucasian voice, she says, to the police hours after the shooting in an interview. It was a Ron and Caucasian. The door of the Cataneo residence opens out. After the knock, John was snoozing, dozing off. He woke up, and Ann Cataneo advised him, someone's at the door. I'll take care of it. He goes to the door. He opens the door, it opens out, steps out of the house, and he closes the door behind him. He is now in what's commonly known as a stoop. Shortly thereafter, there are 4 shots by Lynn Blake, who tellingly tells the police later that she heard John Cataneo's last breath. To do that, she had to be there when he was shot. Because
Objective. Counsel arguing at this point.
That would be a conclusion to be drawn. I'll suspend.
the medical examiner's report will indicate to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Cataneo expired immediately because of the nature of the injuries that the gunshots inflicted. Miss Blake will tell you that about 5 minutes after the gunshots, she went up to John Cataneo's body and heard him take his last breath. That will be her story. Also, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear evidence that everyone in that house, Ann Cataneo and Karen Tobie, had tests of their hands done called gunshot residue tests. There was no gunshot residue test done on Lynn Blake. And you'll hear from Nancy Hargret, who is one of the, well, I'll tell you about in a minute, a new group of friends that Karen Tobie met. You'll hear from her that Lynn Blake commented to her in September of '04 that, you know, they did a gunshot residue on Ann, they did a gunshot residue on Karen. Thank God they didn't do one on me. You'll also hear that Karen Tobie told Nancy Hargret that Lynn Blake shot John Cataneo. Now, Lynn Blake and Karen Tobie did spend some time in Seattle, Washington. They did return, however, to the Daytona Beach area. And it was that horrible summer of '04 when we got hit by hurricanes. And as a consequence of that, Karen Tobie was staying at a motel called the Del Air Motel. She met some new people there, some new friends. She was seeing less and less of Lynn. And Lynn didn't like that. Lynn felt threatened. As a matter of fact, there came a time when Ron Blake told Lynn Blake, Karen is pinning this on you. Karen is going to tell them, and you're going to go down. You're going to go down for the murder of John Cataneo. Lynn Blake started to panic because, number one, she no longer has as much control over Karen Tobie as she did have at once. Number two, she becomes frightened because the police are going to find out that she shot John Cataneo. So, on October the 5th, 2004, Lynn Blake calls the police. Now, she'd already made at least one statement to the police. And then that was on June the 30th, 2004. And we all agreed in jury selection, we're not sugarcoating anything. I could say she was deceitful, she was dishonest. What she did on June the 30th was lie to the police. She had some other conversations before October the 5th with the police, and she lied to the police. On October the 5th, 2004, worried that she was going to be found out, she contacts the police to find out what they know. And she goes down, feigning that she is going to cooperate, swears on her mother's grave everything that she's saying is the truth. And she continues to lie. But she gets information from the police. One bit of information is that they think that Ty Cooper did it. And they think that Ty Cooper did it because of this August the 10th incident between Ty Cooper and his girlfriend, where in Ormond Beach, Ty Cooper is calling the police on his girlfriend to have her removed from his house where he lives with his mother. And Ty Cooper calls the police, not Samantha Alexander. The police respond. And Samantha Alexander tells Officer Hoy of the Ormond Beach Police Department, I've bought him clothes. He doesn't deserve those clothes. I'm going in that house and get those clothes. To which Officer Hoy replies, if you go in that house, ma'am, you're going to jail. To which she replies, the only person going to jail is Ty Cooper because he shot his boss man. That's how Ty Cooper became tied up in this case. The statement of a woman scorned, a person who you will hear also, not to sugarcoat things, is an admitted liar. Because she goes down after she causes Ty Cooper's arrest, she goes to court the next day in front of Judge Mary Jane Henderson and tells Mary Jane Henderson that she lied. Now, after this October the 5th encounter, where Lynn Blake is again lying to the police, frankly, ironically, she's deceiving them and they're deceiving her. You heard about the whole driver's license charade. What the police did, they did hear that there was some friction between Lynn Blake and Karen Tobie. And it was, and the evidence will show this, because Karen Tobie had a new group of friends. She was distancing herself from Lynn Blake at the advice of her attorney, because Lynn Blake was going down for the murder of John Cataneo. Ron Blake had told her that. Sean McGuire, investigator Sean McGuire and Joe Borelli both worked that as a wedge, saying, you know, we're getting calls from Karen Tobie's attorneys saying that we should look at Lynn Blake. They're telling Lynn Blake this. So what do you got? Why are you protecting Karen? Why are you protecting your daughter? Your daughter's turning on you. She's throwing you under the bus. You better save yourself. Look what such a bad person she is. Look at, you've been driving her around like a chauffeur for years, and look, she has a driver's license. They show it to her. It's not a driver's license, it's a fake. They're playing with Lynn Blake's mind is what they're doing. And they did a good job. Because the very next day, now she didn't say on October the 5th, she didn't say anything that incriminated herself or Lynn Blake or Karen Tobie. The very next day, they drive down to Orlando. Lynn drives Karen to Orlando to see Karen's lawyer. Karen's lawyer sees Karen. They have a consultation. Karen comes out. Karen tells Lynn Blake, my lawyer tells me that you're going to be arrested and charged with the murder of my husband, and I've got to stay away from you. Now, Lynn Blake really begins to panic. Now she starts to ponder, and she'll tell you this, as she was driving back, she began to ponder, what is she to do? What is she to do? She even says this. Remember the few times, the evidence is going to show that she very seldom cries. She cried once for the very first time in many, many years when she heard baby Lewis's heartbeat. Well, she cried again when she was driving back from Orlando on October the 6th, 2004. She cried because she'll tell you she decided she's going to go back and talk to Sean McGuire and Joe Borelli and tell them that Karen Tobie came up with this idea. She's going to put the monkey on Karen Tobie's back. She said this. She has this special gift. She can cry out of one side of her face. So as she was driving back from Orlando, she was crying out of her left eye only, bawling like a baby, emotionally distraught. But she didn't want Karen to see it. Karen was in the driver's seat. So she only cried out of one eye. Then what happens is it really has happened on October the 5th. October the 5th, what started in this case was a game of deal or no deal between the state of Florida and Lynn Blake. Is Lynn Blake going to make a deal with the state or not? And if so, what's she going to get for it? Well, we all know now that she did make a deal. What she's going to get for it remains to be seen. Can be probation, might be life in prison. Now on October the 6th of 04, Lynn Blake made 2 statements. She made one statement, and then she explained how she got this gun, and then she led the police on a wild goose chase for the gun. I know exactly where it is. I disposed of it. I know where it is. We'll go find it. Described where the location was. They went out there, spent hours searching for it, all kinds of resources to find this gun. No gun. That's part 1 of the October the 6th statement. October the 6th, part 2, she continues her game of deal or no deal. And because of the fact that on the 5th, aside from playing the license game with Miss Blake, what Sean McGuire and Officer Joe Borelli did also is they gave her copies of the law of first-degree premeditated murder, of principle, of conspiracy. Said, hey, you might want to read over this, see what you think. You know, premeditated murder is punishable by the death penalty. Maybe you want to take this home and think about it overnight from the 5th to the 6th. Interestingly enough, in all this planning and conspiring and so forth that is alleged, everybody seems to agree that Karen Tobie was rarely, if ever, sober. So the evidence is going to show that it would be difficult, if not impossible, for anybody to agree to do anything with Karen Tobie, because you'll even hear when she goes in the bank to withdraw some money. The people in the bank always see her drunk. They're afraid to do business with her because they don't know if she's in her right state of mind, if she has her faculties about her. We hear about no plans in the October 6th and 5th statements about how Karen Tobie is supposed to kill John Cataneo. Well, maybe she's going to do it because John has these late hours. You know, I guess, Lynn Blake uses equivocal terms. I believe, maybe, I think. And all those transpire over time, and you'll hear this into, oh yes, that's the way it was, definitely positive. You know, I think, maybe, I believe becomes, oh yes, definitely positively. And one of these things that you'll hear about is, well, what was the plan, Miss Blake? What was Karen's plan to kill John? Well, first it was fuzzy. I'm not sure. I don't think there even was one. Wasn't even one. We didn't really know. Then until recently, in a second deposition that was taken, she'd already had one deposition taken, had the opportunity to tell things, but in a second deposition now, we have the June 30th statement, we have an October the 5th statement, we have 2 statements on October the 6th, have another statement on October the 7th, then we have deposition number 1, still fuzzy about any kind of plans, but then deposition number 2, here's what she says. Oh yeah, forgot to tell you guys, here's what Karen was going to do. She was going to get in this pitch black ninja outfit and in a disguise, a blonde wig, and she's going to wait until one of these midnight hour calls that John gets from the Home Depot contract, and she's going to go hide in the bushes, and then she's going to come out. Now this is great, you understand, this is just a few days ago, a week ago she tells us this. Now all of a sudden there's all of these particulars. Black outfit, blonde wig, she's going to hide in the bushes and come out, and when John comes home from one of these wee hour of the morning contracts, she's going to jump out and shoot him. It's the very first time we hear that a few days ago. But it's getting closer to crunch time, because whether she gets life in prison or probation is going to depend upon how well she performs here. Now, I want to talk to you about what the evidence is going to show or not show in reference to Mr. Cooper. The evidence is going to show that any allegation or facts that Ty Cooper agreed to shoot or kill John Cataneo is based solely on the testimony of Lynn Blake. And it makes no sense The evidence will show it makes no sense. It's not argument, it's facts. Evidence is going to show this.
Objected, and I'll rephrase it, this is clearly argument at this point, as opposed to facts.
It is argument. I would like you to rephrase the question.
All right? The evidence will show that Lynn Blake's going to tell you that Ty Cooper agreed to get a gun. He's going to be paid $3,000 for a gun, for just getting a gun. She's also going to tell you that then he agreed to shoot and kill John Cataneo for $5,000. With no arrangements for payments. There's going to be no evidence of any arrangements for payments. How, when, where, under what circumstances. No way to contact Ty, no phone numbers, no addresses, no way to contact him. Also, there's going to be no evidence of any contact between Ty. You heard something about Ty being seen in the state's opening statement. There is evidence that Ty was seen June the 26th at the Cataneo residence. Not unusual. Did odd jobs there. His work with Cataneo Plumbing caused him to be there. And also, by the way, evidence going to show Ty didn't just work for Cataneo Plumbing. He also worked for Wendy's. So he had other employment. It wasn't a full-time gig, so to speak. Evidence will show that it was a job to tie him over until he got certified to be a truck driver and go to work with his dad. Dad's a truck driver. But here's what the evidence is going to show, or show in a negative way. There's no evidence about Ty knowing when would be a good time, so to speak. Like with Lynn right next door. She knows because she sees John come and go. She knows who's at the house. She knows how many people are there. She has inside information about all of that. And we have phone records, so we know who was talking to who and who wasn't talking to who. No eyewitnesses as to who shot John Cataneo. None. Even Lynn Blake doesn't say that. Even though her windows were open, she doesn't like air conditioning. Windows were open, curtains were open. She lives about 5 steps away from the door, but she heard and saw nothing, according to her story, until pop, pop, pop. And she tells in her first statements, at that time I was on the phone with Ron Blake. Right just after I hung up, the shots were fired. But the phone records will tell us that it was 30 minutes before the shots were fired that she had that conversation with Ron. Lynn Blake will be the only evidence, her testimony will be the only evidence that Ty Cooper had any knowledge of Mr. John Cataneo being shot or going to be shot. Lynn Blake will be the only testimony that you hear about Ty Cooper providing a gun to anybody. And Lynn Blake will be the only evidence that you hear that Ty had anything to do with this murder. There will be no evidence of any eyewitnesses, no fingerprints, no DNA, no footprints.
Again, this is just pure argument. It's best for closing, not for opening.
What the evidence will show or not show.
He's correctly pointing to the evidence or lack of evidence, and that's appropriate. Go ahead.
No DNA, no blood, no saliva, no hair, no skin follicles, no scratches, nothing under the fingernails of the deceased. No other bodily fluids, no tire prints, no footprints. Lynn Blake will be the only testimony that you hear about Ty Cooper providing a gun to anybody. And Lynn Blake will be the only evidence that you hear that Ty had anything to do with this murder. There will be no evidence of any eyewitnesses, no fingerprints, no DNA, no footprints.
Again, this is just pure argument. It's best for closing, not for opening.
What the evidence will show or not show.
He's correctly pointing to the evidence or lack of evidence, and that's appropriate. Go ahead.
No DNA, no blood, no saliva, no hair, no skin follicles, no scratches, nothing under the fingernails of the deceased. No other bodily fluids, no tire prints, no footprints, no evidence, no forensic scientific evidence at all except for Lynn Blake's testimony. That's not scientific evidence. The evidence at the end of this case will show that the Keys State witness is a murderess.
Again, this is just pure, unadulterated argument.
Thank you. That is bordering on argument, Mr. Palmer.
The evidence will show at the end of this case that Lynn Blake shot and killed John Cataneo, and that Ty Cooper is not guilty, and Lynn Blake is trying to frame him. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank you,
Mr. Dowdy.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I know last week, a long week, thankfully we had a 3-day holiday in the observance of Dr. King's birthday. I hope everybody's recharged. We talked last week about a service that you're doing, your jurors, and outside of military service, as we've said, this is probably one of the greatest services you can do for your country. Now, it's all of you that are going to decide the fate of our client, Ms. Tobie. You also have to decide Mr. Cooper's fate. But I want you to decide their fate distinctively, separately. These are two defendants on trial for murder. You've heard the opening statement by Mr. Davis. You've heard him, the prosecution, outline what they're going to show, what they intend to show. Remember what Judge LaRue said. These are opening statements. What he says, or what I say, that's not evidence. We're just outlining the case for you to tell you what we think the case is going to show. There's going to be some things that are going to be undisputed in this case. And the very first thing is that Ms. Tobie lived a rather unusual lifestyle. Also, it's going to be undisputed, Lynn Blake is a rather unusual individual. They met years ago in the 90s. You're going to hear the testimony. They lived in a trailer park together, and they just hit it off good as friends. As you've heard the statements, and it's going to be undisputed, Lynn Blake is several years older than Ms. Tobie. However, I will not go as far as to say that you're going to hear testimony that there was a mother-daughter relationship. You're not going to hear evidence there was a romantic relationship. They were friends, good friends, just one happened to be younger than the other. But what you will hear evidence of is that Lynn Blake went over the top. Lynn Blake is going to be undisputed. You're going to hear right from her in the statement she gave, she is a control freak. You're going to hear testimony that she manipulated Karen Tobie, she dominated Karen Tobie, she controlled Karen Tobie. You're going to hear evidence that when Lewis was born, she went over the top again. She treated the child as if it was her child. You'll hear testimony that Lynn Blake basically took care of Lewis. You're not going to hear any evidence to the contrary. You're going to hear that, yes, Ms. Tobie led a rather unusual lifestyle. But is she guilty of first-degree murder? Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, solicitation to commit first-degree murder. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this case, and remember, this is the guilt phase where the state has the burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. Judge LaRue, one of the most experienced judges around, is going to tell you what the law is. I'm not going to tell you, the prosecution is not going to tell you. He's going to read you jury instructions, what the elements are of first-degree murder. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stand here right now and tell you she is not guilty of first-degree murder. You are going to hear instructions on lesser charges, whatever they may be, second, third, manslaughter, whatever, but you will hear elements. Remember last week, that long, torturous week where we had to go through whether or not you're qualified and whether or not you can be fair and impartial, set aside your views, and just judge this case on the evidence that comes from that witness stand. I'm asking you this morning is just to listen to the entire case. Follow Judge LaRue's instructions on the law. Follow what the elements are for first-degree murder and the other charges. Now, Lynn Blake, she pled guilty to second-degree murder. She had a plan. You're going to hear testimony of it. I'm not going to stand up here, ladies and gentlemen, after a week of questioning you, probing into your feelings and your life, and try to pull the wool over your eyes. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to insult anyone's intelligence. However, I will submit to you, there is evidence to prove that Lynn Blake controlled this thing. You are going to hear testimony that she was the mastermind of this plan. You'll hear, as she stated, this lady, back in the day, didn't know east from west, north from south. That might be a little cliche statement, but you are going to hear real live testimony that might appall you. But it's going to be testimony, and it's going to be the truth. That this lady, back when this was going on, couldn't have cooked up something like this. It was outside the possibilities, and you are going to hear testimony of that. But listen to the entire story. Lynn Blake had it made. She was like a Freddie the Freeloader. She had a place to live, automobile, money, didn't have to work. And this was all before, I want to make this clear, this was all before Lewis was even born. She had all this. For whatever reasons, I don't know. And I wish I could tell you, ladies and gentlemen, but I can't. Listen to what you hear in the evidence. I still don't think you'll hear it all. And this isn't a courtroom to speculate, but you're going to hear evidence and lack of evidence, and Judge LaRue will comment how to treat that. Before Lewis was born, she had all these things anyway. After Lewis was born, she continued her domination and her manipulation of Karen Tobie. You'll hear specific instances when she drives her all over the town, takes her places, does the grocery shopping, takes care of the house, does basically everything. She's like dressed up like Karen Tobie. She's running the show. It's a very unusual and bizarre scenario with the three people, but it actually happened. And there's not going to be anybody disputing it. Now, you're going to hear testimony. After the state's done, we're going to have a witness who's going to be able to testify that Lynn Blake thinks she's going home. You're going to hear testimony that Lynn Blake thinks that after she gets up and testifies in that witness stand, she is going to reunite with Lewis. For whatever bizarre reason, this lady still believes it and has said so in the past. And we're going to show you testimony. Now, after Mr. Cataneo was tragically shot, 97 days expired, or a little bit over 3 months before Ms. Tobie was arrested. A lot happened in those 3 months, and you're going to hear the testimony. I know we all remember this summer because we had Charlie, Jean, and Francis. It was a terrible time for Central Floridians. And Lynn Blake continued her domination over there during that time period. Now, you heard statements about this attorney in Orlando. I want to make it perfectly clear right now, Mr. Nielsen nor myself is that attorney. That attorney's name was Jim Dowks, and he was from Orlando. At that time, he was helping Ms. Tobie out. He was representing Ms. Tobie. What had transpired, what you heard, what the prosecution says, and what the defense says is basically true. The officers called in Lynn Blake and says, Ms. Tobie's attorney, remember, that's not us, are throwing you under the bus, and you better give it up and tell us what really happened. You're going to hear from the first statement, the first time she talked to the police, Investigator McGuire and Investigator Joe Borelli of Holly Hill Police Department actually gave her some statutes to read to show her how she could be guilty. And I'm not going to instruct you in the law, but it has to do with principles, and Judge LaRue will do that. You don't actually have to do some things to be guilty of a crime. But that's not what I'm trying to get across to you. What they did, they played Lynn Blake on Karen Tobie. And as you've heard the Cooper team say, she has given all kinds of statements. And that's true. You are going to hear all different types of statements from Lynn Blake. But when she gets up on that witness stand, and you observe her demeanor, you observe what she testifies to, it will be clear to you that she is a manipulator, she is a control freak, and she dominated Karen Tobie. All we're asking you is to listen to the whole story. Follow the elements. Remember, the elements that we all agreed that we would follow. Not 2 or 3 elements, not three of the 4 elements. Whatever it is, whatever Judge LaRue tells you, if there's 4 elements, first-degree murder, make sure they have all 4. Because I'll submit to you right now, they're not going to be able to show all the elements against Ms. Tobie. And remember this, you got to show it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's all we're asking for you, and you've assured us that you'll do it. We want a fair and impartial jury, and we want a fair and impartial verdict. She deserves nothing less. And Mr. Nielsen and I have full confidence in all of you that you'll do justice. Thank you, Judge.